Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Before the elections take place in Iraq, the Iraqi public expressed their clear desire to participate in the first legislative elections to elect members of the General Assembly for the next 4 years. Citizens expressed their hope to implement the campaign platforms that were presented by political parties and lists to improve the daily lives of Iraqi citizens. Another door is about to open, making a new phase in the Iraqi political realm. Those who win the legislative elections will govern for the next 4 years, making it an important turn of events with far-reaching effects for both political officials and ordinary citizens. Iraqi citizens view their participation in the upcoming elections as the start of ending the political upheaval in their country and the first steps towards an Iraq where its people are unified.
I will definitely participate because my voice is important in order to serve the political process in the country and to help end the occupation. I do not encourage boycotting the elections or not participating because that will have negative impact.
The majority of the Iraqi public agrees on the importance of these elections and their role in drawing the landscape of the new Iraq.
If the election process is done with calmness, reconciliation and transparency, then there surely will be a new phase of calmness and stability.
There are religious divisions in the government. Since the interim government until now, there have been religious divisions. The Shiites, the Sunnis, and the Kurds. We didn't live like this before.
Despite obvious efforts exerted by different parties to present the details of their various election platforms and convince voters about their effectiveness, ordinary Iraqi citizens are still unclear about the political future of Iraq. It is hard to make predictions about the outcome, and only the ballots will determine what will happen next in this country, where the majority respect the role of elections in resolving matters regardless of who agrees or disagrees.
We have always been promised with words. God willing, this time we will see actions.
It appears that the Iraqis have a big appetite to participate in the upcoming elections, as was the case in previous elections, considering that all major parties have announced that they will participate in the political process. This time elections have become an open field for competition, despite some reservations concerning certain election platforms.
ونبقى في لبنان فالعملية التي أودت بحياة النائب الصحفي جبران تويني هي الثالثة.
The assassination of Jubran Twaini, a Lebanese journalist and member of parliament, is the 13th of its kind since the death of the former Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri on February 14th. The assassination attempt of Marwan Himada, a former Lebanese minister and a prominent leader of the Progressive Socialist Party, which is led by the Druze Walid Jublak, was the beginning of a series of attacks targeting Lebanese officials. On February 14th, Rafiq Hariri was assassinated in the heart of Beirut by a car bomb explosion that also killed 20 others. On the 23rd of March, an explosion that targeted a shopping center in the area of Kaslik in North Beirut killed 3 people. On the 2nd of June, an explosion rocked the area of Al-Ishrafiyah, killing Samir Kassir, a journalist, and on the 21st of the same month, the former Secretary General of the Lebanese Communist Party, George Havi, was murdered near his house by an explosion that targeted his vehicle. Moreover, there was a foiled assassination attempt on the life of former Lebanese Defense Minister Ilyas Al-Murs in the north part of the Lebanese capital on the 12th of July. And on the 25th of September, May Shidiak, a journalist, sustained serious injuries after a bomb was detonated under her vehicle.
ربما كان التوقيت لافتا فبعد ساعات على تسليم ديتليف ميلس المستقيل تقريره إلى كوفي أنان وقبل أن يقدم
What was most notable in the assassination of Jubran Twaini, a journalist and member of the Lebanese parliament, was its timing, which came a few hours after the adjourned Detlef Mehlis handed his report to the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan, who then turned it over to the International Security Council.
عائلة تربعت على عرش صحيفة النهار منذ صدورها في المنتصف الأول للقرن الماضي.
The Lebanese member of parliament, Jubran Twaini, has opposed the Syrian military presence in Lebanon and criticized the Lebanese president, Amin Lahoud's policy, especially after he extended the Syrian stay. He comes from a family that has been playing an important role in Al-Nahar newspaper since its foundation in the first half of the past century. He tried to balance between his role as a journalist and a politician. He was recently elected as a member of parliament on behalf of the Future List in the city of Beirut. He and Samir Kassir, a prominent politician who was also assassinated, were seen in many anti-Syrian demonstrations demanding the withdrawal of Syrian troops from Lebanon.
حيث عاد كما تردد الليلة الماضية إلى بيروت ليلقى.
Mr. Twaini's name had also appeared on the so-called death list that was distributed in Beirut. He had been warned many times that there was a death threat on his life. Consequently, he was compelled to move to France, where he established residence. However, he reluctantly returned to Beirut last night, where he met his fate. He was killed while en route to work at the newspaper. That office had been a center for the gathering and the planning of protests against the Syrian presence in Lebanon. Jubran Twaini was another politician who had been assassinated since the drafting of UN Resolution 1559, which was an indication that this wave of assassinations will not end soon. Since the early 1980s, he had moved many times, mostly living in places nearby, where Christian political leaders such as Bashir al-Jumial, Samir Jaja, and Michel Ouan lived. He moved to the area of Kernet Shakhwan after 1990 until March 14, 2005. Twaini became the general manager for the Al-Nahar newspaper, which is considered to be one of the largest newspapers in Lebanon. During the past few years, this newspaper voiced Jubran's strong and extreme opinion and many of his opposition views.
السنوات القليلة الماضية مواقف معارضة اتسمت بالمتشددة انطلاقا من مواقف جبران التويني التي لم تتبدل.
World leaders unanimously condemned the assassination of Jubran Twaini, a Lebanese journalist and member of parliament. Syria also denounced the assassination and called it an act of terrorism targeting the security of Lebanon. It also confirmed that the timing of the incident was premeditated to implicate the Syrian regime of this crime. While Washington pointed the finger at Syria, Paris and London requested a meeting of the European Union to discuss the possibility of adopting measures against Syria. The world unanimously condemned the assassination of Tueni, labeling it as an act of terrorism that targeted the stability and security of Lebanon. However, the world was indifferent in terms of who was behind Tueni's assassination. While some world leaders directly implicated Syria of killing Tueni, others hinted that Damascus might be involved in his death. However, Syria denied any involvement in Tueni's assassination, confirming that Damascus would be harmed the most by such a tragic incident.
The timing of the assassination is critical. It coincided with the findings of the International Investigation Committee on Hariri's death probe and the involvement of Syria. With this, they wanted to point the finger at Damascus.
Huda al-Humsi, a Syrian member of parliament, confirmed that Damascus would not shoot itself in the foot. The Syrian parliament also condemned Tueni's assassination while hinting that some foreign groups would benefit from his death. It also confirmed that this incident was meant to destabilize the security of Lebanon, and whoever committed such crime is an enemy of the Lebanese people. Meanwhile, the United States directly accused Syria of being behind this incident. The White House spokesman Scott McMillan confirmed that Tueni's assassination is an act of terrorism intended to keep Lebanon under Syrian control. The American embassy in Beirut also issued a statement criticizing the perpetrators and accusing them of trying to curb Lebanon's progress toward sovereignty and complete independence. A similar statement was reiterated by the French President Jacques Chirac, who confirmed that the death of Tueni would give the world an opportunity to double its efforts in making sure that the United Nations resolutions are implemented. He was hinting at those UN resolutions that had been recently adopted against Syria, including the one that had demanded Damascus to withdraw its troops from Lebanon and the one calling on forming the International Investigation Committee in the aftermath of Hariri's assassination, in addition to the resolution that had required requested Syria to cooperate fully with the international investigation, or it would face the consequences. Moreover, the British Foreign Minister and the head of the European Union, Jack Straw, confirmed that the European countries at the EU and the Security Council held talks regarding taking measures against Syria. German officials also condemned Tueni's assassination, confirming that this criminal act would jeopardize the progress, independence, sovereignty, and democracy in Lebanon. Meanwhile, Moscow, without pointing the finger at any particular group, confirmed that what is taking place in Lebanon is an act of destruction.
Detlef Mehlis, the German prosecutor and head of the investigation commission into the assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, handed over the results of his investigation to United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan in New York yesterday. Agence France Presse reported that officials from the United Nations said that Mehlis handed over copies of his report to representatives of country members from the Security Council so they could take a look at it before he presents it to the Council tomorrow. Our colleague Ali Khalid surveyed reaction and expectations from the Syrian streets.
Western countries have ambitions in the region. The issue is not just about Mehlis' report. It is a bigger matter, bigger than Mehlis himself.
If he wants to be neutral, then he has to present his neutrality completely. If he's not neutral, then the result will be the same as in his first report.
The report is going to be strongly influenced by the United States. I think there will be an attack on Syria in the form of political pressure.
The second report is going to be just like the first. End of the story. Nothing is going to be added. It is this one accusation, and they are not going to change anything.
America wants to hold something against Syria, and it is going to find reasons to do so, just as it did for Iraq with whether or not it had nuclear weapons. It is known who killed Hariri. He was killed at the hands of Jews so they could accuse Syria.
Mehlis' report was pre-prepared. It does not require interpretation or anything else.
I think that Mehlis' report is also going to be against Syria and that nothing is going to change in the investigation.
We have seen America's politics towards Syria. One expects the worst.
First of all, his last report was not fair at all. We wish that this new report would be fair.
This is a conspiracy against Syria. It was planned in advance, and the report is for sure unfair and predetermined. There must be a huge colonial project in this regard.
Considering that the first report was not based on facts and witnesses, how could we say that it was correct, believe in it, and be convinced of it? This was the first report, so then what should we expect from the second report? I'm sure it's going to be written the same way.
This is a conspiracy against Syria and against its national stance. Nothing has changed from the first report to the second.
If he was going to go after the truth, he would have to completely erase the first report.
The truth always prevails and injustice falls. God willing, Syria will always be victorious because the truth is on its side.
Leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, told visiting head of the Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, Khaled Mash'al, on Tuesday that the experience of the past 50 years shows that compromise with the Zionist occupiers and negotiations with them will not improve the situation. The leader added that recent victory achieved by the Palestinian nation is in fact the outcome of the resistance and fighting against the Zionist regime. And the only way, as the leader added, to guarantee Palestinians' freedom is nothing but going on with the resistance, keeping united and maintaining vigilance by the nation. Iranian parliament has announced its decision to impeach defense minister for the tragic plane crash last Tuesday that killed 108 people. Members of parliament tabled on Sunday an impeachment motion for Mustafa Mohammad Najjar after the C-130 plane crashed into an apartment and killed scores of journalists, army staff and residents of the apartment. The Iranian defense chief will have 10 days to appear in the chamber and answer tough questions on the killer accident. The Iranian Vice President in Executive Affairs, Ali Saidlu, says technical experts responsible for launching investigation into the last week's C-130 military plane crash will inform the nation, government, parliament and judiciary over their findings. Saidlu also told reporters on Tuesday General Command of the Armed Forces is leading the investigation. However, as he added, the Judicial Department of the Armed Forces can also conduct a further investigation. Iran says it does not need American firms' participation in its nuclear project. Secretary of Iran's National Security Council Ali Larijani made the remark Tuesday and added, quote, Iran is not interested in condescending security guarantees from the U.S. He stressed Iran is capable enough to defend itself. This comes after head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mohammad ElBaradei, said Iran is developing a nuclear program while all its neighbors possess nuclear weapons, and that nuclear states cannot warn others not to develop atomic projects. A host of British parliamentarians on Tuesday called on the government to drop its ban on the MKO terrorist group. Andrew McInally, a member of the House of Commons, told the Arabic TV channel Al Jazeera in an interview that about one-third of the British parliamentarians have called for the, quote, removal of the terror label against the Munafiqin group. He added, calling MKO a terrorist group is, quote, unfair and runs counter to our policies. All the European states, even the US, have included MKO in the terrorist list.
The United States has changed its policy on interrogating detainees. It's now put a worldwide ban on US personnel subjecting prisoners to cruelty. The move was announced today by US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Let's take a closer look.
As a matter of US policy, the United States obligations under the CAT, which prohibits, of course, cruel and inhumane and degrading treatment. Those obligations extend to U.S. personnel wherever they are, whether they are in the United States or outside of the United States.
Ms. Rice made her comments during a trip to the Ukraine where she met President Viktor Yushchenko. Her statement was short, succinct, yes, but it signified a major policy shift towards the International Convention on Torture. The comment follows strong criticism from Europe and the US Congress. The 1984 UN Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman and Degrading Treatment or Punishment defines torture in the following way. Torture means any act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining from him or a third person information or a confession, punishing him for an act he or a third person has committed or is suspected of having committed, or intimidating or coercing him or a third person, or for any reason based on discrimination of any kind. Previously, the Bush administration had interpreted the convention as only applying to US territory. Human rights groups have said the US has exploited this loophole to mistreat prisoners in places such as Afghanistan and Guantanamo Bay. A series of US interrogation techniques also seem to have evolved to get round the convention's definition of severe pain. Recent reports on the American ABC News network, quoting CIA sources, list 6 so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. They are grabbing, slapping, belly slapping, standing for 40 hours or more, forcing a prisoner to stand naked in a cold cell, and simulated drowning. The US Senate has now approved by 90 votes to 9 a measure outlawing cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. The move is an important concession in US domestic politics. Republican Senator John McCain, a former Vietnam prisoner of war who himself suffered torture, has been pressing the administration to close the loophole. Until today, this was aggressively resisted by US Vice President Dick Cheney. But, as they say, what goes around comes around. Yesterday, lawyers acting for Khalid al-Masri filed a lawsuit in Washington. He was abducted in Eastern Europe and tortured by the CIA, allegedly for 5 months. This week, it was revealed that the head of the CIA's counter-terrorism unit had ordered Mr. Masri's rendition on a hunch. Al-Masri is represented by the human rights group American Civil Liberties Union. It's the first organization to challenge alleged CIA abductions and torture of foreign nationals in so-called black site secret prisons. While the US yesterday acknowledged a mistake in his detention, the consequences of his ordeal have turned into a crisis between the US and Europe.
Well, James Dyson from human rights group Amnesty International is with us now. James, thank you very much for joining us today.
Good evening.
Good evening. Condoleezza Rice's statement is being hailed as a major US policy shift. Will it actually make any difference, do you think?
Well, what we'd like to see now is these words to be backed up with actions. That means, quite concretely, number one, the US administration must give the Red Cross access to all their detention facilities, including the secret ones that have been reported on. Secondly, they must allow families and defense lawyers proper access to all detainees. That is not the case for example, places like Guantanamo Bay at the moment. They should do so immediately. And thirdly, they should fully, independently and impartially investigate reports of abuse in Abu Ghraib, Bagram, Kandahar, Guantanamo and elsewhere, and especially ensure that we're not just looking at investigating and prosecuting junior officers, but that the people who have been responsible for the policies in these places of detention also are investigated.
Okay, so there are clear stages of action there. Now, Ms. Rice has admitted that terror suspects are flown abroad for interrogation under a process called rendition, but she's denied they are tortured. So could you just enlighten us, what would be the point for the United States of flying suspects abroad if they weren't tortured?
Well, exactly. You've hit exactly the right point here. There isn't really any point to renditions, which after all is transferring detainees from country to country without legal process. You wouldn't need to do this if they're not being sent to a place where they would risk being tortured. Otherwise, you could use straightforward extradition processes, and a court of law would be quite happy with that. It's very suspicious that these people are being sent abroad without due legal process.
Now, James Dyson, do you think the loophole for the United States to send prisoners to regimes that do torture still exists, despite the comments made today by Condoleezza Rice?
It's of course impossible for us to tell whether at this moment there are people being tortured or ill-treated. I think it's up to the US administration to prove that this is not the case, hence us asking for access to these detention facilities by the Red Cross, by the families of those detained, and by the defense lawyers. That way everyone around the world would know that this did not exist.
And of course, recently the Red Cross refused to visit Guantanamo Bay because the terms of their visit had been declined by US authorities. Do you think that we're fighting a losing battle, if you like?
No, I think many people around the world are becoming increasingly conscious of this. We've seen throughout this week, during the visit of US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice to Europe, an enormous public concern about what has been going on. And also, as you mentioned in your report, senators like Mr. McCain in the United States, who have been pushing very hard for a more stringent control over these policies. So, no, I think that the progress can be achieved.
James Dyson from Amnesty International, thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
كانت مصر
Egypt has expressed its happiness and pride in awarding the Nobel Peace Prize to the International Atomic Energy Agency and its head, Dr. Mohammed ElBaradei. A public statement issued last October by the leadership of the Republic described Dr. ElBaradei as one of Egypt's sons and as one of its most prominent experts on the topic of weapons anti-proliferation. The statement also said that this wise choice by the committee which awarded the prize confirmed the importance of the role played by the international agency in preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons and thus the threat it poses on peace and security of the two nations. It also confirms the urgent need for continuing efforts exerted by the IAEA to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons and implement the Anti-Proliferation Treaty at the international level.
IAEA and its Director General Mohammed ElBaradei.
ولد محمد البرادعي في 17 من يونيو عام 1942
Ahmed ElBaradei was born on July 17, 1942, and studied at the Law Department in Cairo University and obtained his bachelor's in law in 1962. He started working as an Egyptian diplomat in 1964. He was a member of the permanent Egyptian delegation representing Egypt in New York and Geneva. ElBaradei obtained a PhD in international law at the Law University in New York in 1974. From 1974 to 1978, ElBaradei worked as an advisor for the exterior minister. In 1980, ElBaradei left his job as an Egyptian diplomat, where he worked for the United Nations Training and Research Department. Through his line of work in academia, research and diplomacy, he acquired a high level of knowledge in the way international institutions function and operate during war and peace.
أصبح على دراية وثيقة بعمل المنظمات الدولية لا سيما في مجالات السلم والأمن الدوليين، وقد ألقى الكثير من المحاضرات في مجالات القانون والمنظمات الدولية.
He gave many lectures on the topic of law and international institutions, weapons, anti-proliferation, and peaceful nuclear programs. He also wrote numerous articles and books on the subject matter. In 1984, he started working for the International Atomic Energy Agency, where he occupied sensitive positions, such as the agency's legal counsel position. In 1993, he occupied the position as the agency's Deputy Director for External Affairs. Dr. Mohammed ElBaradei succeeded Hans Blix as the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency in 1997, and since then he has been using diplomacy to resolve the conflicts in Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. He was also elected as president for the International Atomic Energy Agency for the third consecutive time last October.
وينتقد البرادعي ما يعتبره اعتماد معايير مزدوجة تجاه الدول التي لها أسلحة نووية.
ElBaradei has criticized what he called double standards of countries possessing nuclear weapons and trying to prevent other countries from acquiring them. He said that these double standards allow some countries to prevent other countries from acquiring nuclear weapons while maintaining the right to not only depend on them for their security, but also to develop them. Dr. ElBaradei's opinions have caused him many differences with the United States. Dr. Mohammed ElBaradei is the fourth Egyptian national to win the Nobel Peace Prize after the late President Anwar Sadat and the international literature writer Najib Mahfouz and Dr. Ahmed Zuhail. Egypt once again gives the entire world another creative gift in a new era by one of its unique nationals, showing the generosity of Egypt's giving and significance of its participation in advancing human development.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.